The notion that the science on climate change is a lie to manipulate Christians is a conspiracy theory that has been circulating among some Christian communities. This idea suggests that climate change is not a real phenomenon, but rather a fabricated story created to control and manipulate Christians into adopting certain ideologies or behaviors. However, a closer examination of the evidence and the underlying motivations behind this theory reveals that it is not supported by factual information. Firstly, the overwhelming consensus among climate scientists is that human activities, particularly the emission of greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane, are significantly contributing to the warming of the planet. This conclusion is based on decades of research, data collection, and analysis by thousands of scientists from around the world. The evidence for climate change includes rising global temperatures, melting of polar ice caps, and increased frequency of extreme weather events. To suggest that this consensus is a lie, one would have to argue that thousands of scientists from diverse backgrounds and institutions have colluded to fabricate this information, which is highly unlikely. Furthermore, the idea that climate change is a lie to manipulate Christians is often rooted in a misunderstanding of the relationship between science and religion. While some individuals may use climate change as a platform to promote certain ideologies or values, the scientific community's primary goal is to understand and describe the natural world, not to promote a particular religious or philosophical agenda. In fact, many Christian denominations and organizations have acknowledged the reality of climate change and have called for action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and protect the environment. It is also worth noting that the conspiracy theories surrounding climate change and Christianity often relies on a flawed understanding of biblical teachings. Some proponents of this theory argue that the Bible teaches that humans have dominion over the earth, and therefore we should not be concerned about environmental issues. However, this interpretation is a misreading of biblical teachings, which also emphasize the importance of stewardship and care for God's creation. In fact, many Christian theologians and leaders have argued that caring for the environment is a moral and spiritual imperative, and that climate change is a critical issue that requires a Christian response. In addition, the claim that climate change is a lie to manipulate Christians is often linked to a broader narrative of anti-environmentalism and skepticism towards science. This narrative is often fueled by political and economic interests rather than a genuine concern for Christian values or biblical teachings. For example, some fossil fuel companies and conservative think tanks have funded campaigns to cast doubt on the science of climate change, often using misleading information and cherry-picked data to make their case. These efforts have contributed to a polarized and politicized debate, which has obscured the fact that climate change is a real and pressing issue that requires a collective response. Finally, it is essential to recognize that the science on climate change is not a partisan or ideological issue, but rather a matter of empirical fact. The evidence for climate change is based on observations, measurements, and simulations which are subject to peer review and scrutiny by the scientific community. While there may be uncertainties and debates about the details of climate change, the overwhelming consensus among scientists is that human-induced climate change is real, and that it poses significant risks to human societies and ecosystems. In conclusion, the idea that the science on climate change is a lie to manipulate Christians is a conspiracy theory that is not supported by factual information. The overwhelming consensus among climate scientists, the evidence from decades of research, and the biblical teachings on stewardship and care for creation all suggest that climate change is a real and pressing issue that requires a collective response. Rather than relying on misinformation and conspiracy theories, Christians and non-Christians alike should engage with the scientific evidence and work together to address the challenges posed by climate change. By doing so, we can promote a more informed, nuanced, and compassionate discussion about this critical issue and work towards a more sustainable and equitable future for all.